Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. In September 1989, his unnatural, by all appearances, 29-year-old Westley Allan Dodd was the perfect all-American boy, model high school student, camp counselor, and U.S. Navy enlistee. But behind his mask of normalcy lurked a predatory sex fiend with a 17-year history of appalling acts of molestation and violence. Children were his victims, and the parks of the Pacific Northwest his personal hunting grounds. In September 1989, his unnatural desires had driven him past simple satisfaction to abduct, torture, and kill two young boys in Vancouver, Washington. Dodd killed a third innocent victim only weeks later near Portland, Oregon. But only when he was caught trying to kidnap a child from a local movie theater was he finally taken into custody by police. Confessing to these heinous murders, he was convicted on all three counts and sentenced to death. The book that we are dealing with this evening, profiling this evening, is Driven to Kill, the terrifying true account of sex killer Westley Allan Dodd. With my special guest, journalist and best-selling true crime author, Gary C. King. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview. Gary C. King.
Hi, Dan. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. It's been a while since I attempted to have you on, and I'm very happy, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy the interview this evening. You're one of the more important true crime authors today, and you're past with some of the incredible stories and some of the incredible books, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's get to this particular story. Now, you've been in the true crime business for 32 years, but specifically with this book, Driven to Kill, about this incredible killer, Westley Allan Dodd, what was it? What were the circumstances that came about that you felt compelled or were drawn to this story, or how did you come to write Driven to Kill about Westley Allan Dodd?
Well, at the time, I was writing for the detective magazines, and I had written a piece, I believe it was for True Detective, and that's what initially whet my appetite, so to speak, for this particular story. And I saw it as something that really needed to be told, something that parents needed to be aware of, and my editor at True Detective also thought that should be the case. So she introduced me to an editor at Pinnacle Books named Paul Dennis, one of the best true crime editors I've ever dealt with, and he immediately wanted to do a book on this particular case. And that's really how it came about. It started with a short nonfiction story and developed into a book over a period of a few months.
We've got to give credit, too, though. I've got to say that Pinnacle is the kind of independent publisher, or the kind of publisher, period, that doesn't shy away from some of the stories that even some real big true crime, the biggest true crime imprints, kind of shy away from. Don't you agree with that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've published several books with them, over the years. But this was, I believe, this was my first one that I'd published with Pinnacle, and everybody, had misgivings about it. I mean, just the subject matter alone alone is horrific. But I had decided early on that I wanted to write a book that would really raise awareness to people like Dodd, sexual predators who basically kept parents as hostages, whenever they're committing their crimes. And when he was doing his thing, nobody knew who was doing it. We didn't know if he was going to suddenly switch and go after girls, whether it was strictly going to be boys, and it really didn't matter because, kids are kids and no parent wants to see their kid become a victim. And I myself was a parent, I am a parent, and my kids were small at the time. And this was so disturbing, we wouldn't even let our kids play outside unattended until after, he was apprehended and the killing stopped. So I decided early on, this had to be a book that was geared toward raising awareness, at least in parents' minds, that they can't be vigilant enough over their child's safety. And I did it in a form of shock treatment, for lack of a better way to say it, I guess. And the book is very disturbing, the way that I wrote it, and it was intentionally made to be disturbing because you can't sugarcoat stuff like this.
No.
It has to be told the way it is, and that's exactly what I did. And I've been thanked over the years from parents who are happy about it. I've been put down, if you will, by other parents who said that I'd gone too far with it. Personally, I think I could have went farther, but I did tone it down a bit, but I didn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, I got to say that you really handled this well, and it seemed that you didn't really have much of a backlash. There's always somebody that has opinions about true crime authors and that they just have a distaste for it, period. So you never can really satisfy those people. But I really thought this was very uncompromising and unflinching, and a lot of people, again, a lot of publishers might say, well, shouldn't have to include that, but I think it's very important that you did. And like I say, I think I'm appreciative, and I think most readers will be appreciative of giving us the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Now, getting to that, this very, very graphic and shocking book, and especially when you consider that we're talking about small children, we're talking torture, and we're talking about this person being very, very, very candid. So this is an amazing portrait of a killer, definitely. Now, maybe to introduce our audience to how this book is written much different than most books, in that the incredible access you had to all the information, but also the killer themselves, again, being very, very candid. And so that there's interviews of the killer, there's interviews from police, there is the diary, and we'll talk about that right away because that's very important. But it really is because of the access, because of the killer wanting all of this information to be known and willing to be interviewed, and also this diary where he kept documentation. So with this incredible access, we also have, and this candidacy from this killer, we have a really good account, which is maybe unusual, which is unusual to have, and you know that as an author. So tell us, from the incredible information you have, his earliest life and his account of his earliest life.
Well, much of his earliest life was accounted to me not only by him, but in the pages of his diary. We started calling it his diary of death, because that's really what it is. But he started out at a very young age experimenting sexually with, relatives, cousins, and so forth, and young children, a little bit younger than himself, and a lot of it had to do with, touching and, exposing and this sort of thing. And that's really his earliest beginnings. And he was caught a few times, and his hands were slapped. But as he got older, as he developed into an adolescent, he began doing these things in front of school children, exposing himself and masturbating in front of children as they walked past his house or his apartment. And that was a fairly short period of his life, because when the police came, that pretty much shut him down. He stopped doing that. He realized that he couldn't do it from the comfort of his home, that he had to go out and start trolling the city streets and parks and playgrounds, etc., to find, willing or unwilling, depending on the case, victims. And this is what he did. And, in his earliest days, he was brought in and questioned and about various sex crimes, most of them relatively minor compared to the things that he ended up ultimately doing. And he was basically had his hand slapped. He was, he received psychological counseling but never finished any of it. He was never sentenced to any difficult time. He was always just sort of let go, or he slipped through, what I like to say, he slipped through the cracks of the system.
Right.
Perhaps at the time people really didn't know how to deal with him. I don't know. But the point is, that I'm trying to make, is he was never punished for his earliest crimes. And he was pretty much allowed to continue until he, started committing the ultimate crime of murder.
Now, we talk about his diary and the extensive interviews that he gave to various people, various authorities. It seems incredible in your book that he talks about every detail of it. It seems rejection from, he felt intimidated from women. There was rejection. He had pulled his pants down. Some of the earliest things he had done with neighborhood boys was pulling his pants down and exposing his penis. It basically, in sort of all you can get from the beginning, is that he had issues with his sexual orientation or identity. He may have had this rejection. He may have felt humiliated. He might have had issues about his manhood in various aspects. But then he jumps to what we would think is more deviant things, like sticking safety pins in his penis. So he was experimenting with some things. It is a fairly slow evolution from flashing to molestation to... So we're talking about 1975, and like you say, that each time that he is either accused or questioned by police, he just seems to get the benefit of the doubt, and no one either recognizes or both recognizes and then punishes him. But we're talking about that in this diary. It seems curious to me that he seems to rationalize this behavior, his making this leap to fantasizing about molestation and abduction, but he offers no real rationale for what happened other than his parents were arguing, and he had some of the same things that happen to most people, I would think.
Yeah, of course. A lot of people have been through the same types of things that he had been through, but and they didn't go on and do the things that he did. But I tried to drag out of him during my interviews with him his sexual orientation, and he didn't really want to talk about it. I had the sense that he didn't really like women a whole lot. He did admit to me that he had dated one woman, but he wouldn't go into detail about it. He's very evasive. And that's really all I could find out from him, about any kind of orientation with the opposite sex. So, yeah, he just went into really great detail in his diary. When he talked to me, he didn't really blame others too much for what he did. He talked mostly about how this was a compulsion that he had and that he couldn't stop, and the only way he could stop was to die. I don't know what you can take from that, but he definitely fits the mold of your typical everyday sex offender who usually, isn't helped with treatment. Some are, most aren't. But it's really hard. It's really hard to pin down, anything that might have contributed to this sickness, if you will, for lack of a better term, that caused him to progress, to murder. Anyway.
Now, he has these murderous fantasies, so part of the fantasy is that he documents his feelings and his plans. So what are some of the plans that he has, and at what point does he make this conscious decision to probably target boys, and why is that, other than his sexual orientation? Is there another reason as well?
I don't recall there being another or particular reason why he targeted boys. Perhaps, it seems like something I recall that he thought it was easier to talk with boys. But he had extensive plans, and even before he attacked the Near brothers in David Douglas Park, he had set out very extensive plans on how he was going to, carry this out. And it was over a period of a couple of days where he made plans to go out and stalk and check the place out, and really it was like a reconnaissance mission where he packed his lunch and went out for the day. And if he came out with a victim, great. If not, then he would go back the next day. And it was a kind of like a trial and error that he went through at first. And I suppose part of that was building up his nerve to a certain degree to actually, make an abduction and to kill someone. But he was very extensive in his planning. He had lots of future plans. His diary detailed a crudely made torture rack that he had actually constructed, in which I included a picture of in the book, that he, hoped to tie his victims down on and commit surgeries on them while they were alive, unconscious. Things such as, removing their penis or their testicles. It was pretty horrendous.
Yeah, he wanted to experiment with them and also have sex with them after they were dead, so necrophilia.
Yeah.
And he documents all of it. Yeah. We talked about how he evaded any kind of serious punishment from authorities, but at one point he did get a 10-year sentence, and just to illustrate how unfortunate he was and unfortunate the rest of society and his victims were, he served only 4 months of that 10-year sentence. And it seems like there's constant times. He spent 118 days in prison, and at some point he made that conscious effort to change the way he did things and be more serious about anyone telling authorities, because he had been reported to authorities numerous times.
Right, yeah.
Now, we also got to talk about, he did move some 3 times, because you talk about in your book that he was, where is it, in Washington he was born. Sorry, hope I don't mispronounce this. Toppenish, Washington. And then he later moved to Seattle, and then later to Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit about, because we just skipped over this, tell us about his stint in the Navy, because it seems interesting that give us the reason why he even stated himself why he wanted to enlist in the Navy, and how he did in the Navy. What was his experience like?
Well, I don't remember anything particularly negative. In fact, I don't remember a whole lot about that aspect of his life. He didn't talk about it a whole lot. And, God, this has been 20 years ago. You've recently read the book. I probably should have read it. No. What I wanted to point out is very interesting. Again, a lot of people think, well, serial killers are very, very intelligent, but for the most part they aren't. And this guy was
at least in military terms, he was a very serious military candidate. He went into the Navy and was the top 10% of his class, and then they put him on submarine duty. But of course, he was discharged for attempting indecent liberties. So, but again, not really punished, and not seemed to be recognized for they recommended that he get counseling. So it seemed all along the way if there really is a cautionary tale on how many times somebody could have intervened and should have intervened, because there seems to be gaps on exactly why he only did 4 months out of 10 years, and there seems to be some of these very, very strong questions. So.
And that's one of the really sad things about this case, is the fact that intervention, was not efficiently effective. Any time that intervention did take place, nothing happened. And like you say, he was a bright fellow. He was intelligent. I want to say clever more than anything. He knew how to manipulate people. And he learned that, I think, at a pretty young age, to be able to get what he wants. And as far as his Navy experience goes, it seems like he was honorably discharged, or I can't remember now. It's just been so long. Do you remember whether he was honorably?
No, it didn't say dishonorably discharged, but he was discharged, and he was imprisoned for 17 days. And it was attempting indecent liberties. So it was he was molesting as soon as he got to the camp. And then there was a couple attempts, and then he was. So everybody was on to this guy shortly, and that was part of the moves as well, because it seemed to want a fresh start. But then all it really was that he was refining his fantasies and making it more serious that no one was going to live to tell the tale.
Yeah, that says it in a nutshell, really, because that's how he ultimately became, and he saw that as a way, I guess, a way of preservation, so that he could continue doing what he enjoyed doing best, and that is, molesting and killing little boys. Those were his words to me. That's what he enjoyed doing. That's what he lived for. And it just. It's sad. What's really sad, I met the fathers of the boys, the victims that he murdered, and when you look into their eyes and you see the depth of their hurt and their sadness and the emptiness that's left behind, it's an awful, awful feeling. And yet these gentlemen, were supportive enough of me and what I was doing to actually appear on TV with me, on a local talk show. And despite the fact that, they had to look at Westley Allan Dodd's picture on the front of the book every time they went to the grocery checkout stand. It's just awful what a parent is left with when something like this happens. And you develop empathy really quickly when you deal with, survivors of victims of violent crime. I don't know. Got off on a tangent there. Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm glad that you touched on that, because the thing is that this, again, for those that don't know this story, if they do any kind of research at all, and when they do read this book, this is one of the most graphic documentations of murder and this murder fantasy. It's very non-typical. And the depth of, again, this guy's very, very candid. A lot of these guys some guys like Lloyd Bundy would never really admit to necrophilia, or Gacy would downplay some of the aspects of his crimes, but this guy, like some evil killers, revels in it, but it seems to be not exaggerated. It seems to be, for whatever reason, just very, very candid, but very, very graphic and shocking, disturbing, and vile, basically. And some people, so you've handled this with a great amount of care, and then again to be able to have the fathers, who really aren't true crime buffs or anything like that, and sometimes are, critical of some of the journalists or, the newspapers, the media itself. So it's a testament that you handle this with a lot of care and sensitivity. Was there a conversation at all about the inclusion of, because you really don't hold very much back in terms of, you haven't censored much of this diary and its contents. So was there a conversation at all about that with any of those fathers?
Not before the publication of the book, no. I did, forewarn them. We had a few minutes to chat before we went on the TV program, and I did forewarn them that much of the book was graphic, but I also took the opportunity to explain the reasons, behind it, and they seemed to understand that. At least they indicated to me that they did. And it was just, of all the things that I've written about, all the murders and crimes, and I think I've published something like 17 books now and like 500 short articles. This is the one that has stayed with me. I've never forgotten it. It's just there all the time. It doesn't take much to start dredging up the memories of me sitting in the interrogation room with him, and that in itself is, another story. I mean, the guy actually enjoyed talking about what he did. And I suppose we'll get into that at some point. I don't want to jump too far ahead, because I'm sure you kind of know where you want to go with this. But
well, it's not so linear, but the thing is, what we haven't actually spoken about, and you can go as far as you like with this, in terms of, again, we don't want to give much away or read from the book itself. In terms of what he's actually said, just suffice to say that it's the depiction of what he'd like to do, the depiction of how he would like to kill, and then fantasies of future plans, again, which seem to accelerate from the murders he had already committed. So, but tell us about the actual. We were, if the audience is still with us, if we go back to the David Douglas Park, he had made a diagram of the park. He, like you say, it was like recognizance in that he had these plans and extensive notes and kept detailed notes of basically his hunt and when would be the best time to hunt according to his observations so far. He even picked out the park, what entrance or where he would hunt would be best to separate boys from each other. And then he documented, I saw 3 boys aged to this 8 to 10, and one was cuter than this. So detailed, sickening, disgusting, and horrifying notes. Now tell us about the actual abductions and murders as they occurred. Not to say dates, but in terms of what he actually did.
Yeah, well, he actually used the term the hunt or hunting in his notes. And, that's precisely what he was doing when he went to David Douglas Park, and he included details of how he almost had, a victim on a particular day, but he was scared away, because of such and such, or encountering an adult or somebody else, or whatever the case may have been. But on this particular day, when he killed Billy and Cole near, he basically was out in one of the bike paths. David Douglas Park, for people who aren't familiar with it, covers a significant amount of acreage, and it's a city park, but it seems like you're not really in the city. And he went on these hiking paths and these bike paths, and that's where he saw these 2 boys, and he stalked them for a bit, and he approached them at some point. They were riding their bicycles. They were actually out looking for golf balls that morning, because they would collect golf balls from a nearby golf course and turn them in for money. And something or other, they decided to cut through this park, and there was Dodd, and he encountered, I don't remember which one first, but probably the younger boy, but I just don't recall. And basically told them that he wanted to do things with them, and things that they just were too young to really comprehend. I mean, they understood what he was wanting to do, but they didn't know why or what the repercussions would be and what the ultimate end would be. So there was some, basically made them pull their pants down, and so he could touch them, and one thing led to another, and he ended up after 20, 30 minutes of this, ended up stabbing the boys. He stabbed one first, the other one tried to get away, caught him, stabbed him. They both died. It was really horrible. I don't know how else to emphasize that point, but he ended their lives right there on the bike path. Nobody else was around. It was a quiet morning. But did that answer your question on that?
What kind of clues did he leave behind in terms for police? Did they have any evidence and at the crime scene itself? What was their position? How did the police respond at that time, other than we've got a couple young boys dead?
Someone found the boys, and reported it. It seems like he left a knife at the scene. Again, this is, been over 20 years, so I'm using my memory. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But it seemed like he left a knife at the scene. As far as other evidence, I don't believe there was much. I think the ropes were there that he bound them with, or whatever he used to bind them with. I mean, it may not have been ropes.
String.
And they really didn't have anything to go on. Someone, after the fact, reported a suspicious character that they'd seen lurking around the park, and they provided a description which turned out to be pretty darn good. I mean, if you've seen the police drawings of the person of interest before they knew who they were dealing with, it looks like Dodd. Mm-hmm. So they had that to go on, but the case really didn't move along. It just sort of was at a standstill until he, committed his next murder. Even then, it didn't go too far. I mean, really, the way he was apprehended was almost a miracle, a blessing, whatever you want to call it. It was luck, and he would have had a fourth victim. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I tend to do that.
Yeah. We'll just go back a little bit, because now Dodd wrote in his diary that he'd like to be able to have more time for various types of rape rather than just a quickie before murder. And so after the two boys, he decided when he would like to do his next murder, but he also wanted to perform experimental surgeries on his victims. He realized that rape and murder was not enough. So after the two boys, so he decided that Saturday afternoon after work was the best time to find a boy, and then he found his third victim, Lee Isley.
Lee Isley.
Isley, 4 years old.
Yeah, he found him in Portland at Richmond Elementary School. Him and his brother were out there playing along with a friend. His brother, Isley's brother, was older than him, and he had taken his little brother to the park or to the playground that day, and because Lee liked to go play on a structure they had there called the pyramid, and or the volcano. The volcano. It looked like a volcano. It was made out of concrete or some substance, and he liked to play on this. And Dodd was sitting outside the playground in his car, waiting for the perfect victim. And pretty soon, when Lee Isley's brother left Lee to play on the volcano, that's when Dodd moved in, and he started talking to him, and promised him candy, toys, and whatever if he'd get in his car and go for a ride with him. And the kid was 4 years old. Dodd seemed harmless enough, so he got in the car with him, and that's the way Dodd abducted the little boy off the playground. And he took him back to his apartment.
Didn't he let him watch cartoons?
Yes, he did. He let him watch TV. Bought him a toy to play with. He made Lee as comfortable as possible at first until he decided to start sexually abusing him, and he had his apartment all laid out. He had ropes connected to his bed that he would use that he planned to use to tie his victims up with. And but Lee, being 4 years old, wasn't too much of a handful for him, and he did some of the things to Lee while Lee was asleep. Such as inserting a metal rod into the end of his penis and into his urethra and taking it out, things like that.
And then he strangled him while he was sleeping.
Right, into unconsciousness and then revive him. It was once he finally killed him. Of course, he put him in the closet and hid him behind pillows or a blanket or something while he went to work, hoping that the body would stay there until he got home, and then he could abuse it some more and so forth. And he did this until decomposition started to set in, which doesn't take long. You're talking about a matter of hours, day and a half, whatever. And then he eventually went out and dumped it after he had sex with the little boy's dead body.
Took pictures as well.
Took pictures, yeah. Took pictures of the body hanging in the closet. I had forgotten about that. He actually hung the boy from a rod in the closet. And, my God, I saw those pictures too, and I don't believe I included any of them. I don't think we would have.
No, that's too much. Nobody needs to see that. I feel sorry for you. So it was the other thing. He burnt all the clothing, but he kept the child's underwear, Ghostbusters underwear.
Yeah.
Put it in his briefcase under his bed. Put it under his bed. His mementos under his bed.
Yeah.
For later use. And then shortly after, I think it's that day, a hunter discovers Lee's body at Vancouver Lake.
That's correct,
So now they're still looking for a killer.
They're still looking for a killer. The community is basically terrorized, or at least thinking parents are. And all you can do is turn on the news and hope that they announce that they've caught this maniac. And that just didn't happen right away, unfortunately.
Now, the police are getting all kinds of leads. People have said they've seen Lee with someone. There was a lot of reports of the child's appearance in various places, wasn't there?
Yeah, it seems like there was. Seems like they went out for fast food or junk food at a convenience store, maybe. But yeah, there were sightings with him and Lee.
Yeah,
and it had to be within that first critical period of time, from when he abducted him and took him back, because he only kept him, I think, alive for like a day or so,
right?
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, wasn't long.
No.
Now, Are police at all looking at Westley Allan Dodd for any reason during this time? Has anybody come forward? I know sometimes when you get investigations like this filled with so much emotion, there's so many leads that even good leads get mixed up with the not-so-good leads.
Well, you had the Clark County Sheriff's Department in Vancouver, Washington, looking for this killer. And then after Lee Isley, you had the Portland Police Bureau looking for a killer, a child killer. And I'm not sure if the Vancouver Police Department was involved or not. I don't believe they were. If they were, it was peripherally involved, not directly, because the cases didn't fall within their jurisdiction. But so you've got these two fairly big agencies that are in fairly close proximity to one another. Portland's across the Columbia River from Vancouver, Washington, and they decided at some point they needed to work together on it, and they did. They started sharing information, and but as I recall, there weren't any leads that pointed directly at Dodd just yet.
No.
They were pretty much at a loss as to who was doing this, other than the witness sightings and the police drawings.
Right. Now Dodd Wesley decides that he's going to change things a little bit in terms of the park. So his idea is maybe to find a child at the movies. And so tell us a little bit about what happens at the movie theater.
Well, he first started checking out a movie theater in Vancouver, and he didn't have any luck. So he moved on down the road a bit, about 14, 15 miles east of Vancouver, to a small town called Camas. And he went to a theater there called the New Liberty Theater. It was playing a movie called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids at the time. So he thought, well, this should be good. I ought to be able to find a victim in there. And so he did. He went in there and he kind of waited and watched, and he saw this boy go to the restroom, followed him in, and I guess it was a fairly good-sized boy, if memory serves me correctly, but not too big for Dodd to handle. So Dodd decided that the best way that he could get him out of there and get him out quickly is just to pick him up and carry him. So he did. He picked the kid up, walked to the lobby with him. Kid, was kicking and screaming, and Dodd recalled later that he just figured people would think that it was an angry parent, dealing with his kid or some such thing. But an astute moviegoer who I think had his own kid or stepchild or something there at the movies saw what was happening, so he decided to follow him. And he watched, and as luck would have it, a few blocks away from the theater, Dodd's car broke down. And this Good Samaritan, approached him. And, he saw what was going on, but if I remember correctly, he had telephoned someone, or the police possibly, before he approached Dodd. Somehow he had the police alerted, and Dodd was basically arrested at that point, trying to abduct this kid from the theater. And it's lucky that they got him right then and there, or he would have had a fourth victim.
William Graves. Now, we want to talk about, too, is now that they have the reasonable grounds, they have a warrant, and they search the house, and I alluded to this briefcase. Tell us about the briefcase and what they found at the house and what they found in the briefcase.
Well, when they went into his room, first of all, they noticed that it was very orderly, very tidy, very well kept. Everything had a place and it was in its place, sort of thing. Many serial killers are like that. Yeah. And he had the ropes attached to the ends of the bedposts, so they saw that the restraints were there, waiting to be used. They found the briefcase under the bed that contained newspaper clippings of the previous crimes. He'd followed the case fairly closely, very closely actually, and had kept those either as souvenirs or as, things to where he could just keep track of what was going on to maybe stay one step ahead of the cops. I'm not sure, and also Lee Isley's, underpants were in there, and I believe they found other ropes and restraints in one of the chest of drawers, in the chest of drawers. What else did they find? I can't remember. It's just been so long.
They did find the torture rack in the...
Yes, of course. How could I forget that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the torture rack was there. And that's how I got the picture of it. The police gave me the picture they took of it. And
did we mention was the diary in the briefcase?
The diary was in the briefcase, yes. And
what did that look like? What did that look like?
It was just a number of sheets of paper that had been stapled together, pretty much, or like a. Well, it was kind of a. It was pieces of paper that were stapled together in a binder. It was like a plastic binder, and if I remember correctly, it was black, and it was all handwritten. He took the time to print it out. He used cursive at some points, but most of it was printed, and it was just very, very meticulous diary.
Then there's anatomical drawings as well, almost like autopsy, again to coincide with his experimental plans and interests.
Right. Yeah, he had the drawings. You're right. And it was awful. He had a Bible in there too. Actually, he found that he had scribbled some stuff in the copy. It wasn't really the Bible, I think it was the New Testament, and he had scribbled some satanic stuff, in it.
And he had altered some religious pictures as well.
That's right.
Dodd too.
He liked to collect pictures from magazines and do things with them. Yeah.
Now, what was the interview like with police? How cooperative or uncooperative was Westley Allan Dodd with police? How willing to talk was he with them?
At right from the get-go, he was really willing to talk. I think he realized that it was up, that his time was up, that he's caught now. He's going to have to deal with it, and he talked to them fairly quickly. I don't remember exactly when, but I do remember the circumstances of my being able to talk with him. I can tell you about that.
Sure.
If you like.
Tell us about that. At what point was that?
That was about, 4 or 5 months before his execution. And I was over at the Clark County Jail interviewing Lieutenant Larry Byler, I believe was his name, for a different story that I was doing. And I was already working on the Dodd book, and I really hadn't had any intentions of interviewing him. It just seemed so distasteful to me that I didn't really want to have anything to do with him. And I didn't think I'd be able to either. But anyway, when I concluded my interview with Byler, he looked at me and said, "Hey, we've got Wes Dodd upstairs. You want to talk to him?" Kind of took me by surprise. And I stumbled around a bit, and I said, "Well, sure, yeah, if he wants to talk to me. I mean, what else am I going to say?" Didn't really want to talk to him, but I ended up going upstairs into it's a modern jail. It's in a pod format, and Dodd was laying in one of the cells, and Byler told me that, he lays there and masturbate. Would masturbate most of the day, probably fantasizing about his victims. And so they went and asked Dodd if he wanted to talk to me. I told him what I was doing, and he said sure. So they put him in an interrogation room across from his cell with me, and that was the first of our meetings. And we sat there for a good 3.5 hours that first meeting, and he basically told me everything, from start to finish. I mean, I had to come back and start filling in the details later on, but he enjoyed recounting his horrible deeds. He would kind of roll his eyes back and look up at the ceiling and start recounting in very explicit detail what he did to these boys and how he enjoyed it and so forth. And he was definitely like in a dream or fantasy state. And then he would come back forward, and look at me and start talking to me like a normal person again, and tell me about the good things, that he'd done in his life, helping old ladies across the street, helping women change tires, helping neighbors out, the boy next door, type of guy, the good guy.
Yeah.
And sadly, there seemed to be somewhat of a good side to him. I mean, if it just didn't exist very often. And you could kind of see it, but you could also, see through it. You could see through that he enjoyed this telling of what he did. It's what he lived for, and that's what he told me. He says, I live to rape and murder little boys. And when he said that to the court and said that he didn't want to appeal any of his his conviction, he pleaded guilty. Anyway, and he didn't want to prolong the issue. He just wanted to be executed. And his reasoning for that was because he couldn't do the things he loved to do anymore, not be in a jail cell, and he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail, not being able to kill little boys.
Also kind of surprising too, he asked to be hung. He said because he believed it was the most appropriate execution, because he said that's the way Lee Isley died.
Right.
So you got to give him a little bit of credit, not much, but little.
But there's a lot of speculation about that too, and even myself, I wondered about that. Now, is that really why he wanted to be hung, or did he want to have one last thrill of sorts? Of some kind. I'm not quite sure how to go into that because I don't know much about that. But
I know what you mean. It's hard. It's hard for a person that doesn't even comprehend what the word remorse means to have some form of remorse. So I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Not so genuine, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did he give any definitive rationale or reason for? I mean, like I say, I looked at the information. It just seems to go from confused person sexually to now he has fantasies about killing, abduction, torture, castration, experimentation. Did he give any reason why he thought?
Why he thought what?
Well, he thought the reason why he had these urges, that he was compelled to do this, that he needed to do this.
All he would tell me was that he couldn't control the urges, that he would get these urges. He didn't know what came over him, but he couldn't control them. He said that he had to go through the process, and each time that he did go through the process, it was like a vicious cycle that he ended back up at step one after a while, and he understood this. He understood this to a degree, that it was cyclic, but he didn't know why. He just knew that these urges existed and would come over him, and he had to carry them through.
It seems too like a lot of these really extraordinary serial killers, that they have an unusually high sex drive. They they claim to have an unusually high sex drive, but like you said, they're not. The guards are witnessing what this guy's doing. In your book, you document how excited he was after a couple of these abductions and murders, or when he was first doing this, being sexually aroused for an entire day. You know, these sexual desires and thoughts and fantasies really dominated his being, really.
Yeah, they did. And my first meeting with him, and you know, like I told you, it was very lengthy. I actually felt really, really dirty afterward. Hands with this guy, and his hands were cold and clammy and almost, you know, kind of wet. It was a horrible feeling, and I could never forget it. The first thing I did when I left there that day is I stopped at the men's room and washed my hands for about 10 minutes before I left the building. I just felt awful. I felt like I was just unclean.
Yeah.
But, it's all about the fantasy.
So you covered a story because you initially thought it was important. Then you got probably more involved than you ever wanted if you were interviewing the killer when you had no idea you would even be doing that. And like you say, you wash your hands for 10 minutes. So, and the memories are still there. You saw the crime scene. You witnessed the crime scene photos, which I've never seen any, and I don't know if I'd volunteer for it. This is a cautionary tale. What do you come away from writing this book that you might not have thought before undertaking this endeavor?
Well, I really, when I walked away from this, I told myself, you know, never again, no more child killings. I can't deal with this. It's just too, you know, despite the importance of getting the information out and presenting it, you know, like it really happened to make people aware, I just felt like I could never cover another story like that. Didn't turn out to be that way, but that's how I felt at the time. I mean, I did end up writing, you know, more later on, you know, about Joseph Edward Duncan, the Shasta Groney case. But what I came away with were some really bad memories. Paul Dennis, the editor, flew out from New York to meet me in Walla Walla, Washington at the state penitentiary there. You know, we went to the execution. We didn't witness it.
Oh, really?
I didn't really want to witness it, but they had a lottery system in place at the time to where, you know, we drew tickets, and my number never came up, neither did Paul's. I was thankful mine didn't, but we did talk to all the witnesses who did see him executed, so we got the report, you know, from them, and but that was another experience in of itself.
What was his demeanor? How did he react? Anything noteworthy?
Dodd or the editor?
Yeah, Dodd. Well, no, Dodd.
Well, he basically took it as much like a man as anybody could.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember his exact words, but I know that he did say some words. I think he might have even apologized. I should have read the book before I had this interview with him again. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine.
But I try to put it out of my mind. All of these things that I write about, I try to limit the time that it spends inside my head before I go on to the next one. But as I recall, he took it like a man and didn't resist. I've heard about a lot of them resisting and having to be dragged, you know, to their execution. But he walked right up to it. They put the noose around his neck after they, you know, hooded him, and that was that.
Yeah. So how long was the entire project? Again, it stays with you and it will stay with you forever. But how long was the entire project in terms of length for you?
It was a pretty fast track book. I did it in, I believe we started it in September, October, and we finished it right after the execution, which was in January of '93. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about a 3 or 4 month project.
Yeah.
I typically take longer than that, but we didn't have much time on this one.
And this was, not to say that anything's open and shut and there's no surprises, but this was a foregone conclusion where this person definitely qualified for the death penalty. It's pretty hard to find any mitigating circumstances, I would think. Wasn't an issue of insanity, was it?
No. That never came up really. I mean, if it did, it was never considered seriously. There's a part of me that really hated to see him executed simply because he was so willing to talk. I think if they could have kept him alive, that psychologists could have learned a lot from him about.
I think so too.
Such anomalies of nature, because that's really what he is. But that didn't happen, and in a way that's unfortunate. Plus, life in prison would have been a better punishment for him, because that's what he did.
I would think. Yeah, I would think. I don't know personally, but I think, geez, if you can tell me that life in an 8x12 cell is good or somehow not ample punishment, I don't know. I think it's ample punishment. The rest of your life sitting in a cell, I think.
Yeah. Well, not to mention, how other inmates treat people like that. Sex
exactly.
His life would have been a living hell.
Yeah, and then he would have at least, and not to say that's what you want, but that's just the order of things. He would have experienced the kind of fear and apprehension that just a taste of what his victims experienced. But at least he would have that, universal thumbs down from society and even the convicts and everybody. He would have that. He would have that to live with, at least.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the death penalty because there are mistakes. So.
I'm with you. I used to believe in it. I've kind of sat on the fence for a while, and believe it or not, there are killers out there that I could probably pull the switch on myself. But there have been far too many mistakes made. Too many innocent people have been cleared by DNA, and if one innocent person is executed, that's one too many in my book.
Well, their whole system is that they would rather let, whatever it is, the 50 innocent people go, or 50 guilty people go, rather than one innocent person be convicted. Well, I don't see. That's just flapping your lips when you let somebody die because you made a mistake. And you see a lot of resistance from district attorneys who prosecuted the cases to ever admit any kind of mistake, even though it's a matter of life or death for somebody who's been sitting in prison. So it's shameful, actually. So
it is.
I think
very shameful.
And I think the court cases don't really people don't really pay attention to them, and they're conducted completely differently when you're dealing with a death penalty. All of a sudden, you're just worried about that. It's a completely different. It's a completely different situation for a trial. Like here in Canada, we have abolished the death penalty, I think officially in the 70s, or in practicality in the 70s, so it does not become an issue. And we have our own problems here in Canada with how we conduct murder trials especially, but I think that's what it bankrupts. It takes some time in some states, as you know, 20 years to get the execution done anyway, and almost bankrupts the state going through the appellate process. So that's another good reason not to do it. So now, Gary, you, like I mentioned in the introduction, you've been doing this for a long time, 32 years, 500 articles published about true crime. You're one of the, like I had mentioned, one of the most important true crime authors in America, which means, and that's the world basically. Tell us, you have 17 books, I know I counted as well. Tell us about your website and how people might contact you, and just tell us where they might take a look for some of the other titles that you have written over the 32 years.
Sure. You can always contact me through my website at truecrimeking.com. I have some podcasts on there, too, that explain why I write some of the things that I write, and all of my books are available through there. There's, links to purchase on Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble or various other outlets. And I also have a new page up with Facebook. It's facebook.com/truecrimeking. And I'm always happy, to interact with readers. It's one of the things I enjoy about this job. I mean, you look for things to enjoy.
Yeah,
and, It's really not fun to actually do the writing about them, but I see a need for it, so that's what I do. But those are the two best ways to contact me, truecrimeking.com or facebook.com/truecrimeking. Little play on the name. But
yeah. And it's interesting, too, and I'm really glad we finally got I convinced you to come on the program, is because, as the title indicates, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and it's not like I'm not interested in one-off killers or, wives murdering husbands, but the thing that most fascinates me, and was the killer that I profiled in the book that I did, Trophy Kill, has a lot of shared characteristics with Westley Allan Dodd and some of the most heinous, Dennis Nielsen, some of these people. And even before that, I always found those type of killers, for some odd reason, more interesting than everyone else, again, because they just seem to be such a freak of nature. Whether it's mob killers are interesting to me, and I've read numerous books, but something keeps gnawing at me to try to understand, and this book, Driven to Kill, is like no other in terms of getting inside. I know it's a cliche, but inside the mind of a serial killer. Again, you need a mental shower after you read this book, because you get inside and outside, and as fascinated as you are, you need to read about Westley Allan Dodd. And so I want to thank you for Driven to Kill, but a lot of the other titles that you've done as well, including Texas 7, important cases, but also featuring some of the most shocking killers in true crime history. So I got to say that.
Yeah, I've written about a few of them, and I've veered off the path a few times, and I always keep coming back to these kinds of killers, because I'm fascinated by what does go on inside their minds, and it's always a challenge to see if you can get a glimpse of what goes on inside their minds, and that kind of drives me. I mean, you can't tell that to an editor. That's one of the reasons I went indie, because they keep wanting to do what they want to do, and frankly, I need to do what I want to do, because I know what it is I like to write about and study. And but I'm with you. I think these people are fascinating, and people need to learn about them.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is too, it's when you talked about going independent as well, I think the publishing industry is going through a major evolution, I guess. But I think a lot of authors that have paid their dues, like yourself, and paid, and got not so much of the profit. I think it's hopefully the internet is going to be one of those things that levels out that playing field, and obviously people can access your books and get the information and find out about these cases, and then find that you've written a book about that particular case. And so not to say goodbye publishers, but hopefully it ushers in a new time in that's a little more equitable for authors, I think. So
yeah, well, I'm very grateful to the traditional publishers. They gave me a break when I needed it, and they helped build my name recognition, and that all helped. And but now it's a new day, and in that sense, I'm just beginning.
Yeah, and I want to say too that for people that might miss this as well, this book was originally released in 1993, so it seems like Pinnacle is coming out with the true crime classics. So and this book did exceptionally well and super well received. So I got to congratulate you too that it's Driven to Kill is one of those official, basically true crime classics. So I urge people to go out there and seek this out and get one of those classics. So I want to thank you very much, Gary, for coming on the program. Hope to speak to you again. What is your latest project that you have released, and or what are you working on soon to be released?
Well, my latest project is called Crime Scene, True Stories of Crime and Detection. It's a compilation of 15 pretty fascinating stories that I've written throughout my long writing career, and I just put it in a book form. It's available as an ebook as well as a trade paperback, and so far it's being pretty well received by readers. I didn't know if it would be or not. I've never done anything like that, and I'm working on that. And right now I'm doing an Amazon nonfiction short on the mystery deaths at the Spreckles Mansion in San Diego. It's not a mystery as far as the police are concerned, but it's a mystery as far as the relatives of Rebecca Zahau and Max Shacknai are concerned. There's some things that need to be answered, and hopefully they'll reopen that investigation at some point and come up with either the same determination but with more answers, or a different determination. But that's my latest project. I hope to have that released in a few weeks. But aside from that, I've got some other stuff coming down the chute.
Well, great. Well, let me know, and we'd love to have you back on, or I'd love to have you back on, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy that as well. So, again, I want to thank you very much, Gary, for coming on and talking about Driven to Kill, the Westley Allan Dodd story, and thanks very much, and have yourself a good evening.
It was my pleasure, Dan. Thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you tonight, and I hope that you will have me back someday.
Absolutely. Good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.